My name is Dave, and I'm your host for Soul Ascension Insights. In today's episode, we'll take a look at what happened one night to UFO experiencer Chris Bledsoe. Let's get right to episode number 11, titled Life-Changing UFO Encounter. On January 8, 2007, Chris Bledsoe and his family's life changed forever. Chris, his 17-year-old son Chris Jr., and some work friends decided to go fishing after work near their home in Fayetteville, North Carolina, on the Cape Fear River. As the sun set, the fishing party decided to build a fire and continue fishing. Chris, familiar with the area, decided to go for a walk. As he walked through the woods, he heard something following him through the trees. When he moved, it moved. When he stopped, it stopped. Chris had explored and hunted around this area since he was 5 years old, and never had cause to fear anything in those woods apart from snakes and bears. But an intense fear came over him, and he walked faster to get to the field past the tree line. He felt a massive wave of relief as he reached the field, and felt he had left behind whatever was following him in the woods. Soon, Chris had something even more frightening to worry about. The field slowly increased in elevation from the river bottom. When Chris looked towards the top of the field, he saw two flaming orbs, each about 45 foot in diameter, hovering about 200 feet in front of him. He dropped to his knees in awe of what he was seeing. But a couple seconds later, terror and dread had him up and running for the cover of a ditch. Should I stay? Should I go? What on earth could those things be? He thought as he cowered in the ditch. Remembering his son, he got up and started running back to the river. As he looked back, he saw a third flaming orb had now joined the other two. As he looked at them, he froze and felt an intense connection with them. As he watched them, they watched him. Again, terrified, Chris tried to hide and dropped into a depression in the ground. The next thing he remembered, he was about 50 yards from the fire by the river. He was terrified, but relieved to be back near his son. When he reached the fishing party, one of his work friends exclaimed, "Where in the world have you been?" Chris replied, "What do you mean? I was just up the road in the field." The friend replied, "No, you weren't. We've been up there looking for you the whole night." Chris then noticed that his son was not with the group. He asked where he was, and the group said he went walking to the field to find you. Panicked, Chris started running back through the woods, briars and thorns lashing his face, shouting his son's name. When he stopped to listen, something grabbed his arm. Chris looked down to see his son standing up beside him. "Dad, why did you leave me? Where did you go? There were these creatures. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move." "Son, I've only been gone 20 minutes, Chris said. His son replied, "No, Dad, it's 2 a.m. You've been gone all night." His son explained that he had gotten worried and started walking up the path to look for his father when he saw two red orbs coming down the path that stopped in front of him about 15 feet away. He then noticed that the orbs had turned into some kind of beings. He described them as two little entities glowing softly with red, fiery eyes. The eyes were mechanical in nature, like shutters. One of the little translucent beings walked around playing with stuff. He would pick up a stick, look at it, and then throw it to the ground. But the other being was always watching Chris Jr., guarding him like they had a job to do. He couldn't scream, and he found that he was paralyzed, unable to yell or move. For over 2 hours, his son lay in the brush in abject terror, trying to scream for help, trying to move back to the fire on the river's edge. When Chris and his son got back to the work friends at the river, it was quickly decided to leave everything and head home. Then one of the group exclaimed, "Oh my God," and pointed up to 9 balls of light circling about 100 feet above them. As they began to rotate faster, 3 of the 45-foot balls of flaming light flew down into the woods across the river and hovered in plain sight. All were dumbfounded and terrified. They all figured that it was the end of the world, and they would have to fight for their lives. Somehow, they started to slowly and quietly move toward the pickup truck, and as the last door closed, Chris pressed his foot to the gas as they made their way out of the woods and through the field. But their ordeal was not over. The fiery orbs followed the truck as it careened up the dirt road, and it continued to follow them as they dropped each man off at their homes. Each kissed their family members, grabbed their guns, and prepared for the coming alien invasion. Chris and his son were now alone in the truck, headed for home, when they noticed a huge rectangular craft now hovering above the truck as they drove. The enormity of the craft was mesmerizing. But they made it home and rushed into an empty house. Fortunately, Chris's wife and the younger children were away visiting relatives. But once in the house, they became alarmed as they heard the dozen hunting dogs in the outdoor kennel barking and wailing, obviously in distress. Chris felt compelled to go outside and check on the dogs, as his son begged him to stay in the house. Chris, his son, and Rosie, their 110-pound Chesapeake Bay Retriever, headed out the back door and started walking towards the kennel in the dark. When Chris reached the kennel, he noticed that the dogs were barking at something in the nearby woods. Having hunted with Rosie and the other dogs all his life, they both knew what to do. Chris sent Rosie through an opening on the right side of the tree line, and Chris ran to an opening on the left to watch what got flushed out. The fear was too much for his son, who ran back to the house. As Chris positioned himself, he could hear Rosie and knew she had found her quarry. But suddenly, standing 4 feet in front of Chris, was a 3.5-foot tall being, gently glowing the color of the moon. It had 2 red eyes with a glassy, translucent triangle affixed to its chest. Startled, Chris said to the being, I'm sorry I ran. You got me." The being telepathically responded, "You don't understand. We are not here to hurt you. We are here to help you." A split second later, Rosie came flying out of the woods, heading full speed for Chris and the being, and at that instant, the being disappeared. The next thought Chris had was about his son, so he headed back to the house with his nerves shot and his mind reeling. His son was frantic as Chris entered the back door. Needing a cigarette, Chris opened the blinds to crack a window. But when he looked out the window, he saw another being, this one much bigger and taller than the first, steadily walking across the yard, headed to the back door. Chris slammed the blinds down and said, "Son, we got to get out of here right now." They ran out the front door, jumped into the truck, and drove to a hayfield 5 miles away, and parked so they could see anything that came their way. It was a clear, starry night, with a half moon casting a blue light over the field in front of them. They both watched the area around them intently until exhaustion took over and they fell sound asleep. This experience was the beginning of a long and difficult ordeal for Chris and his family. But over time, Chris developed a special bond with a wide variety of entities and crafts that he could summon seemingly at will. And these strange experiences continue to this day. Chris Bledsoe's amazing experiences are wonderfully chronicled in his book, UFO of God. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Soul Ascension Insights. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I leave you with a book list for those who wish to explore this topic further. Thanks again, and I'll be back with more episodes.